Forget it. So welcome to In Conversation With, third one of these that I've done, and I'm delighted to welcome Jenny Richards today, who is a superstar yogi and also runs Jenny Richards Coaching. And so I invited her along today really to talk about sort of how coaching works. I guess how it is complemented by yoga and mindfulness and meditation, and really just to give me and maybe you as well a bit more of an idea about how it might benefit you. So without further ado, welcome, Jenny.
Thanks, Lisa. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, welcome. So I wondered if you could first of all just kind of introduce yourself a little bit, tell us a bit about yourself and your business and how it might differ from other things that we maybe know a little bit more about, or we think we do, like coaching or psychology.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose I'll start with me. So I'm a mum of one, and I'm married and very happily married. And I've worked in the public sector for many years. And for the last 3 years, I've also been coaching, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. So I've started my own business, as you say, Jenny Richards Coaching. And I'm really aware that people don't always understand what coaching is. So it's a great question to start off with, just in terms of what coaching is. So I would describe coaching as an alliance. It's a partnership. So I'm not going to impart knowledge on you as my coachee today. I'm going to help to build your self-awareness, unlock potential, and if there's goals that you want to achieve, is understanding what those are and helping you to work towards them. So for me, it's working with you at all levels. So, your deeper levels, maybe your values and your beliefs, and then behaviours as well, which everybody else sees within you. So it kind of feels like a great conversation, really, is how I would describe it. How it differs, I suppose counselling is probably, there's a little overlap with counselling because some of the approaches are quite similar. I suppose using an example would be, if you're thinking about driving a car, counselling will work very much with looking in the rearview mirror and staying there and looking behind you and understanding where you've come from. And counselling will stay very much in that rearview mirror. Whereas coaching, I'm going to help you to drive forwards. We may look in the rearview mirror and have a look at some things to understand where you're, the past might help to understand where you're going or what impacts you as you move forwards. But I will spend the majority of the time working with you to get to where you want to get to your destination. The other things it's similar to mentoring, for example. Mentoring is where you would impart knowledge. So you would use my experience as a mentor, and I would tell you what I've done to get to where I am, and encourage you to do some similar pieces. So coaching is very much about a partnership, an equal partnership. So I'll ask you questions, I'll help to raise your self-awareness, but I'm not going to impart knowledge, and I'm not going to spend too much time in the past. It is very much working forwards.
So looking at goals, really unpicking why you may feel there's barriers there. So it is really interesting, and I know we talked before about this, about some of the synergies with the yoga philosophy around understanding the mind, and not just as well is understanding it, but in a way to kind of liberate ourselves from it and not be held back by some of our conditioned beliefs, whether and working out where they might have come from, if that's useful, but knowing that that's not us. So in yoga we believe that's not us. We are not all of those things. We are much more than that. We are whole, actually, but we do need to understand how all of these, we call them samskaras in yoga, or vrittis, little chatterings, distractions of the mind, if you like, and then all of this and these constant chatter, and all we have led to believe that we are, from wherever, from our childhood, parents, our society, friends, everything that we do creates these imprints which then if you imprint them enough, they become a habit, they become a samskara, which is like a wheel. And the more you do them, the more they become ingrained in you. So then we believe that's who we are. And it might be that we believe that's not for me. You know, I'm not good enough to do that, or I had a bad experience with that in the past, that's why I can't do it, rather than actually, that's not true. You know, that's just a created reality in your mind that is causing that barrier. So I can absolutely see that what yoga doesn't is a similar thing. Yoga does, it's you've got to do the work. You know, you've got to do the work yourself. There's no one, someone can give you a set of these guidelines. This is what the philosophy, you know, the old rishis and ancient techniques showed, and actually through experience and working, but it isn't someone can fix it for you. You got to put the you got to work for it, and you got to put it in, and really want to as well.
Yeah, and I think that everything that you just said there is about self-awareness, isn't it? So it's about understanding what's happening and why, and what you are and what you're not. And you talked about patterns there in almost beliefs and forming, and coaching pulls on a lot of different psychological theories. So, you know, there's some theories that talk about beliefs forming, you know, really early in childhood before you're 8 years old. So a lot of these patterns form. And if you think about transaction analysis, which is one theory, they talk about life scripts. So you build these patterns, and it's unconscious. So it might be the simplest things from what your teachers say or what your parents say. So if you're always told you have to turn up on time and you're never to be late, then that could that imprint or that belief forms. And it's fine if it helps you at the time, but at some point in the future as an adult, it might not be so helpful, and it might actually not serve you anymore and be helpful. It might be quite limiting, you know, because if you are on your way to work and the train's late, and that creates a complete panic and anxiety because you can't be late, because that's what you believe, then it could have an impact on how you then turn up at work and show up and behave. So that's almost starting to limit you because you can't be late. So understanding some of that and where that might come from, and recognizing that it actually doesn't serve you anymore, and choosing to do something different or to believe something different is really important.
And what's really interesting is that we quite enjoy reinforcing what we believe to be true as well, is part of the human condition. So you know, we seek out ways to get the universe and others to agree with us, and that actually can be really limiting, because often it closes us down to possibility, to the being another view. And you see it on social media a lot, you know, that people are very dogmatic. It's this is the way, and you know, actually without being open, you can never know, you know, you can never know really, you know, it's an ongoing process of learning and opening and listening, but also understanding that everyone else is on that same path. So, you know, when you can free yourself from the knowledge that this person who's very, very determined on that they're just going from their past patterning and conditioning, and they won't necessarily realize that that's not necessarily helpful either. So if you can be in a relationship, whether it's a friend or partner or your family, where everybody's pretty open to listening, learning, fabulous. You know, how many times does that happen? You know, because we are all subject to, you know, this is how I believe it to be right, and I'm going to reinforce that as much as I can by getting people to agree with me and surrounding me by people who agree with me, and limiting my exposure to those that don't. And they become, you know, someone else, rather than in yoga we say we're actually all connected. I'd say the difference is, you know, we also say, you know, you don't need to be around negative energy or people who drain you or whatever, and there's, you know, self-preservation, but actually half of the time it's you draining yourself, because you don't want to, you're being made uncomfortable by someone who's saying something that doesn't chime with your preconceived ideas about what is right and wrong. And when you start to notice that, it's so interesting. You know, so many times you feel the bristles almost, like, I'm gonna, you know, and just allow it to flow. And then, you know, can I open my eyes and see it for what it is, rather than what I perceive it to be?
And I think there's something about emotions there as well, isn't there? So, you know, sometimes when people challenge our thinking, we see it as a threat. And then if our threat response kicks in, which is emotions,
yes,
then we're almost switching our rational brain off. And because we're in that threat response, and you see that a lot in people's patterns with anxiety, or how they're thinking. So if my boss at work criticizes me, it might kick in my threat response because I now fear that I'm not good enough. If that's a driver in me, that fear triggers that threat response, and then I'm not acting rationally because my emotions have taken over. And it's interesting listening to clients and bringing that into their awareness as I'm hearing that language, and just the subtlety of some of the language that they use. I can't, listening to that and understanding, well, who says you can't, and starting to question and trying to shift their perspective as well. I think one of the other things you've just made me think about is the patterns we get into with relationships and that type of thing. And I know I mentioned transaction analysis a minute ago, but one of the part of the theory for transaction analysis is different positions that people work in. So you can be in parent, you can be an adult, or you can be in child. And if I know I'm going to use an example of a colleague at work where we clash in our views, and that triggers a response in me. And it wasn't until training to be a coach that I realised what was happening. And we get into patterns with people. If he comes in and talks to me in critical parents, and straight away I respond in rebellious child. So straight away, that interaction between us is a pattern that we get into, and I can change that just as much as he can. And if I move into adult in the middle, I might be able to bring him into adult, and then we can engage in a really productive conversation. But while we're in these parent and child situations, that's really difficult. And I can hear it in clients sometimes where they're struggling with an individual, maybe a family member, or at work, or a difficult boss, or anything, a troublesome teenager. It's I can hear that, and we can use, as a coach, I might introduce a tool to change their perspective. So there's one where we look at it from 3 positions. So I would ask you as a client to tell me what it's like as Lisa, and then move you into a position where you're looking at Lisa, but you're the person you're having difficulty with. So what are they thinking and feeling, and moving you into that. And then as an observer, so what are you seeing as an independent observer between Lisa and the other person? And that's really powerful, because you can almost see people's perception changing. And that's what shifted my view with my relationship with my colleague that I've just described, was doing that exercise and realizing how my response was influencing his response as well, and what I could do about it.
Oh, it's so interesting. I mean, we all can relate to that, can't we? And often it is at work, or within your family, or your relationship even, and we kind of feel stuck as well. It's like, well, how do I change that? Because it is such a pattern. I would say for me, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I definitely am much better than I was. The yoga meditation practice, the ability to slow down. So the idea is to use the breath, the mindfulness, and the awareness to just slow down that response, so you can notice it, rather than you being that automatic, I'm going to react. Now, it doesn't mean that doesn't happen still all the time. You get a message or something triggers you, and whatever, that's always going to happen to a certain extent, to a lesser extent, or a greater extent. But what you can do something about is noticing it, rather than just be I'm just going to revert to type, as we do. And the breath and the calming and the releasing and the observation is absolutely part of it. Noticing where it feels in the body, it's a churn in the tummy, or you get like this, or you start to feel that slight heartbeat where you're feeling a little bit anxious, as you say. It's that fight or flight response. And can you relax into that to allow it to dissipate, to see more clearly before you respond, rather than react? And I have to say, since learning some of those techniques, it's really transformed relationships, because once you do that, they respond differently, as you said. And then and then there's much more harmony, and those episodes happen less because you're not perceiving it in the same way as you would have done. So there's a lovely analogy in yoga that we are all kind of like this pure, abundant light that's there, but it just gets a bit, if you say we've got like this diamond, which is our soul and our pure heart or whatever you want to call it, but the diamond gets a bit mucky, gets chipped, and you can't really reflect the reality of the situation with all that muck and chips and dirt, which is our patterns, our thoughts, our perceptions. So when we polish up our diamond, then we reflect more clearly, and so that we perceive things as they are, not how we are, which is, sometimes, because another person can say exactly the same thing and we won't be in that pattern with them.
And I think I like that analogy, the polishing the diamond, because, and I think you mentioned earlier on as well that yoga is very much about doing the work yourself, and coaching is exactly the same. And using that analogy, I suppose I'm helping you through coaching techniques and questioning to help you polish that diamond. And actually, there's a diamond in everybody. You've just got to work out how to clean it, to polish it, and what's going to help with that. So that's a really good analogy.
I heard earlier as well, it was something about, and also, we want to turn that muck to fertilizer. So it's not just removing it, but it's then using it. So we use that kind of, we remember those patterns so that we can understand the people that aren't on perhaps the path, or that don't understand themselves as well as we think we do, or I do, that they're still, kind of going through that same motion. And so you don't take it personally. So that fertilizer that you've created from your muck can help you to understand and help other people. And then that passes on. And that's the idea.
And I think that's kind of what happened with me, really. I went through a difficult time at work quite a few years ago now. And, that's when I started coming to your yoga sessions and working on myself there. And it took me a while to really feel that, but it almost got to a point where it was a real energy builder for me doing yoga. And I felt quite tired and exhausted afterwards, mentally as well as physically, but it gave me something that was a calm, it was a peace. And I kind of think that I've built on that, and coaching has helped me. I had a coach and got me through a really difficult time and got me back to work. And I'm almost passing that on. I've changed that dirt that was on my diamond is now fertilizer, and I'm helping other people the way that somebody helped me. So that feels like a journey. And the other thing it makes me think about is resilience, and people talk about resilience all the time, and I think it's really important at the moment with the COVID situation and a huge change and transition that people are going through. And there's probably quite a bit of fear there as well for a lot of people. And it's recognizing what builds energy in you, what helps you, and yoga is definitely that, the mindfulness piece, and being able to not be tied up with those thoughts and just knowing that they're there, but focusing in on just being present. And I suppose I think about that. Coaching is very much working on yourself. You're spending an hour, 90 minutes on you, and people don't always do that. There's very few people that spend time working on themselves, and it's really important.
100%. I mean, it's the only relationship that you're going to have every minute of your life. There's no other, because you're probably, your parents will die before you. And even then, they're not with you all the time. You're with yourself 24 hours a day, every day of your life, every breath you take. And yet we collectively spend very little time on that relationship. And I couldn't agree more. I think maybe as things do happen, you start to do that more. And people still feel guilty. So I'm just writing a piece about self-love, because it can get wrapped up in kind of like bubble baths and Prosecco. And, it's kind of like, and self-love is, for me, is not that. It's not stuff to make you feel good. It's actually the inner work, the luxury, in inverted commas, of having time out to work through everything that you are and everything that you're not, to reveal joy and happiness, and kind of then spread that on. And I find, it is interesting, because you know, as you said, you have to do it regularly. It's not, you can do it once or twice, but it's actually a daily, hourly thing. So the practice, yes, get on your mat, do your meditation, have some coaching, blah, blah, blah. But actually, the self-improvement piece isn't just reading an inspirational book or listening to a podcast or do whatever. It's that self-inquiry. We call it svadhyaya in yoga sutras, which is that self-inquiry. How did I react to that today? You know, when I met that person and I reacted in that way, how did that make me feel? How might I do something differently? How can I let go that regret from the past that I'm still holding on to, that's not serving me? What can I do to support others in this situation? So all of this is constant. And if we see it as such, it's not a burden, not a chore. So, you know, people say, oh, I haven't got time. You haven't got time not to. You're with yourself all the time, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The consistency is very much like, so an analogy I like to use is, you sow a seed. The seed doesn't sprout. What do you do? So I'll give up on it. It didn't sprout straight away. No, we know you have to water it every day. You have to nurture it. You have to be patient. You have to give that consistency. And then this starts to sprout. And then you start to feel the benefit. You start to see the results. Same with yoga, meditation, whatever it is. And then you start to see the results. So that spurs you on a little more, give it a bit more water, and it becomes a tree. And then it self-sustains. You don't need to water it anymore. And that's how I see the sort of the spiritual journey, really, or the inward journey is about that. You've got to make consistent effort to start with. And even when it starts to sprout, you can't leave it. But hopefully when you become enlightened, awakened, then you do a lot less because it's just you. That's you then.
It reminds me, there's a couple of things there. So I've had a couple of clients now who will tell me really excitedly when they come back in after a few sessions and say to me, do you know what I did? This happened, I had this, and the first thing I thought was, what would Jenny be asking me now? And that really, I can feel that here. So I'm thinking, do you know what? That's that self-inquiry, that's that self-development. So they've realised the value of that time on themselves, which I facilitated as a coach. And they're now thinking in that way. So they're asking themselves the questions that I would ask them. And that's self-coaching, that's that self-inquiry. So that's lovely. And I think the other thing that you've just talked about, that kind of spiritual enlightenment, it very much reminds me of a model that I've got quite attached to, because I think it really resonates with me. And it's by a guy called Robert Dilton. It's called Neurological Levels, which all sounds very complicated. But in essence, if you imagine a triangle, and at the top of there is that spiritual piece, and at the bottom is environment. So what it talks about is that development and different layers and levels of an individual. So it talks about, if you can change your environment at the bottom, and it will change. If you go up to beliefs and values, the higher the level, the you influence the levels below it. So if you start working at your beliefs and values, that's quite deep. But doing that will help with your behaviours. And then if you move up and start thinking about who I am, how I connect with the universe, it will influence everything. And it almost then creates this, with the triangle at the top, with the spiritualness, it then opens up more possibilities in terms of really understanding yourself. And I love that model, because quite often, I mean, I can work on all levels. Some people quite happily come in and go, I want to just work on this, and I want to work on, I've got a presentation. My goal is to give this presentation really confidently, and that's it. So that's almost behavioural.
So you're not going to say to them, well, have you connected to the universe today? It's not that relevant then.
No, absolutely. But then other people come and talk about being stuck. Or who am I? I don't know what my purpose in life is. And there's your spiritualness. So I might not go in there, because I might want to understand what's happening behaviours wise and in your environment. But as I move up, the more impact I'm going to have with the rest of the person. So it really helps me to think about that in light of yoga as well, and the purpose of that spiritualness.
It's interesting because it's almost this model is different to Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a way, but it's got some synergies. And so is the chakra system. So if you look at the chakra system of the rainbow up the spine, which is similar, you know, enlightenment at the top, and earthliness at the bottom, red.
I hadn't thought of that. That's it is, isn't it? Yeah.
It is ever so interesting that sometimes you've got the new sort of ways of looking at it that, you know, are thousands of years old in the energy systems of the East, but basically, they don't exist on their own. But without doing the work on the lower ones, it's very hard to do the work on the higher. I mean, you know, if you've got an empty belly, if you're hungry and you have no shelter, it's much harder to work on the spiritual stuff. If you like, because you don't have the luxury of it. You've got to be working 24 hours a day. Now, true spirituality would say that is your dharma, that's your goal. You still can do it. And there may be people, but it's much harder for us normal people to, you know, to work on that higher stuff if you haven't met your basic needs. But equally, none of them are mutually exclusive. So we would say in the chakras, they all have an element as well. So you have, you know, water, fire that's within us. And, you know, kind of like, so you've got your basic needs from your housing to your food, your drink, sexuality, creativity, the need to flow through life with water, the fire in our belly. This is the will, the sense of self, I am. That's determination and drive, but not ego. You know, the ego is a whole new subject, but enough to get you going, but also fire can burn. So all of these things, the heart, compassion, empathy, love for self. You know, actually one of the blogs I'm just writing is about this kind of, this self-love and the need to prioritize that in a true deep way rather than a superficial way of I'm treating myself to half an hour's meditation. That's all I want. And then we move up to the throat. This is our communication center. Now, this is communication with ourselves as well as others. It's so vital. You know, words can cut you like a knife for years. You know, you're looking back at what happened in the past, but you know, how many times can we remember stuff that was said to us as children that still cuts today, really? And then we were to the higher, the awakened state, our intuition, our third eye, and then the crown. So it would be interesting to look at those two models and side by side and see if there are any synergies.
I know we talked before and we didn't talk about some of this. So just as us talking, we're almost discovering more things that are aligned really in terms of thinking. And I do wonder with the older yogi type approach how much that's influenced, you know, kind of more modern ways of thinking. And you know, there's an evidence-based starting around, you know, coaching and there's lots around counselling and like I said, you've almost got some overlap in terms of approaches. You will get some counsellors that are very goal focused counsellors, and that would be, for me, would be very similar in a way to coaching, even though you know, that forward looking rather than rear view mirror approach. But I think there's lots of similarities. And you know, just thinking about positive psychology, that's something that's talked about more and more, because psychology as a field has always looked at the negative sides of human behavior, whereas positive psychology is looking at the psychology of happiness. And you talk about self-compassion there, and I hear that a lot in people. You know, they're working really, really hard and they're doing lots of stuff, and then, you know, I might ask a question like, so when do you spend time on yourself? What do you do for you? And I can see the body language change, and they think, I'm not doing anything for myself. And you know, we often don't treat ourselves with the compassion that we would our best friends, you know, or our family, close family members. And it's bringing that awareness as well in terms of what supports and what doesn't. And you know, positive psychology for me is so important because, you know, thinking about what makes you happy, because happy is a concept, isn't it? And people get really hung up with, I just want to be happy. Well, what does that mean? What's happiness? where are you? We use scales a lot in coaching. So, you know, if you're saying you want to be happy, what does that happiness look like? What is it on that scale of 1 to 10? If 10 is this, describe your 10, and then where are you, and where are you on that scale, and what do the next steps look like? Because when we work in concepts, it's really difficult to really understand what it is that makes us happy, and we tend to reflect then in, well, actually, am I a 6? Am I a 7? What would it mean to be an 8? And that helps people to move forwards.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because we also have in the Yoga Sutras, we talk that you can't. So we know from experience that, you know, we've all that I'll be happy when, if I get a new job, I'll be happy. If I get that car, I'll be happy. If only my husband would wash up more, I'd be happy. If this, if that, if that. And actually, none of it is. It's attachment to our thinking we have some control over the situation. And so for me, when we kind of like that relax, nothing's in control, you know, the ability to flow with it, to see things clearly, and actually know that happiness isn't anything that we can provide in that way. It will provide some momentary happiness, but long-term happiness, I prefer the word joy. We call it joy state, or samadhi, or contentment. Santosha is what we talk about in yoga, is much more about sort of an internal state that we cultivate all the time. So we try to remove ourselves from the need or the attachment to, and this is a concept you hear in Buddhism and yoga, and all, attachment to stuff, attachment to the way other people are, attachment to everything. It's really, really hard to do, because this is the society we live in, and it's an ongoing thing. But when you remove it's not to say we don't enjoy the sensory pleasures, we don't enjoy company, we don't enjoy food, drink, whatever it is. We absolutely should. It's a privilege. But if our happiness is only determined by it, you're always going to be disappointed, because someone is always going to disappoint you. Your expectations to be met have got to be constant. And it's that is, for me, such a liberating thing, but also such a tricky concept to cultivate.
Yeah, and I think you've just reminded me of people's values as well, because, and going back to Dilts and that triangle, that hierarchy, you know, if something's rubbing with your, if you're feeling, you know, stuck, or you don't feel quite right, or there's something, you know, not working for you, it's probably because your levels are out of alignment. So it's understanding what isn't adding up. So if you know, you deep down, you've got some really strong values that aren't being met at work, in your environment, that's going to really rub, and you're going to feel it somewhere, or in your head, or in how you're thinking, and just feeling 100%. Unhappy, and so unpicking some of that as well, and understanding people. We don't talk about values and what's important to us a lot. It's quite conceptual, but working at that level is really quite deep, and but it can bring some amazing almost realizations about, you know, this job really isn't for me. I'm here because it's almost an expectation from society that when I finish school, I then have to be educated. So I continue my education, I go to university, I go and get a well-paid job. But it's making me really unhappy, because it's really rubbing against my values. And then there's almost that, how do I step back from that? So reconnecting to your deeper self and your values can then help to guide you in terms of how to change direction. Your environment. So you're moving back down the hierarchy and influencing your environment by maybe changing jobs.
And it's so true, because as well, we sometimes can be so stuck because of this expectation of ourselves that, well, I have a certain level of mortgage, I have a certain lifestyle to keep up, but it's making you miserable. And, you know, and it's kind of like, you know, that trade-off between taking the leap to something you love, or will love, or get out of something that's, again, is not chiming with your values and making you, you know, you're making your energies low and really making you suffer over that long held belief and patterns that I have to do this to be enough, to be worthy, to be happy. And yet I'm not happy, because I can buy loads of cars, but it's not happening. And I wonder, I mean, one of the things that I think is good that's come, I think, through the last year and all the challenges, and it absolutely has been a challenge for a lot of people, a lot of transition and change, but I also sense quite a lot of insight that people have come to from people I've chatted to, that perhaps they need a bit less than they thought they did, that they've had time to reflect on what's important, you know, family time, less time rushing around. For some, you know, it's absolutely not always the case. So there will be, again, and that's that, having that space to pause. You know, sometimes we go on holiday and that's when you go, right, that's enough, I'm not going back to that job or whatever, or I'm going to work towards. You have to have the space sometimes, and this has been an enforced long space. Even if you've been working at home, it's still been different for many of us, to reflect on, you know, what is the essence of contentment. And content, we don't like really being content, do we? It seems boring, and that's been a little bit of a frustration. But contentment, you know, when you I was liking it, we have this term santosha in yoga, and contentment is absolutely bliss usually, because, you know, we're like, yeah, we have the highs, the holidays, the this, the that, and the other, and we have the lows. And when we're in the highs, they always come down to contentment, and then we get the lows, you know, someone dies or we leave or something bad happens, and then we have this kind of wave. And when we're down here, we want to be here. And when we're up here, we're going to be here. So, you know, if we can kind of bobble along with contentment and be happy here, then when the downs come, we've got a little bit more resilience. We don't always have to be up here. This kind of up and down isn't actually realistic for humans. So this, the sort of the mantra, this too will pass, this too will pass, is a great one. It's a Buddhist one that's, you know, reminds us that nothing's permanent. You know, every good mood, every bad mood, every day, everything changes.
It reminds me of acceptance. You're talking, you know, thinking about change, and you know, there's a curve, isn't there, to change, and it's, you go through different stages as you accept. You know, acceptance is almost coming out of that. So you might be up here, the change happens, you might go into denial, a bit of shock, a bit of anger that it's happened, and then you dip right down, might be quite sad, depressed, you know, and then you've got that kind of coming out of it into acceptance, and then working from there. And, you know, quite early on in lockdown last year, you could see people struggling with that, and that denial, that anger, as they're coming down, as the change, and everybody's got to stop work or be at home and not go out, and those liberties taken off us. And that really hits, you know, hard, doesn't it, when you can't go out, or you can only go out once a day for exercise, and that's massive. It's a huge piece for a lot of people, and people move through that in different ways, and it's not linear. I don't think you kind of move around. Sometimes you're happy with it and you're starting to accept, and then something else will happen, and it sends you back again. But it's recognizing that everything has a flow, as you talked about, and if you recognize that, and this too will pass, you almost start moving into acceptance. And then once you're there, I think you're in a better headspace, maybe because your emotional reaction has ceased, and you're more into your, okay, I'm here, so what can I do, what's positive?
No, I'm trying to see if I can thrive in this situation. It's a new reality. I don't like the new normal word. It just is. It's not a new anything. It just is. This day in this moment is as it is. And the analogy I love to think about is a sort of a spring from the top of a mountain moving its way down to the sea. It's going to get there. It's going to get there eventually. That's the way water is. And if you've ever had a leak in your house, you know it will get everywhere. But you know, but it might get a dam. You might have rocks. You might have someone puts a physical dam up. Might have to make its way around. Might have to go underwater, over water. But it will get to the sea. It will get to its destination eventually. So that water element within us, we're water, really. You know, most of us. It's the same. You know, we're all meandering down that river to death, but it's true. Along the way we'll have some blocks and barriers, And again, I mean, that's something we don't, why am I sorry to mention death? It's like we're all going to die. I'm going to die. You're going to die.
Yeah.
We all are. And what we hope is on the way, we have a nice ride. And when we see a block, we see if we can go around it. If it takes a bit longer, so be it, but we don't stop. We keep moving towards the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And your resilience, to work through those barriers and those blockages. Some people really struggle because their resilience is quite not there. So if they're feeling burnt out or, their battery, I always think of resilience as a battery. So, batteries naturally will start to, lose their energy. So how do you recharge that battery? What helps you to feel full of energy again? And, if you've not got the energy to remove some of those barriers, and you're not, it can really,
it'll just take longer
really
to get around them.
Yeah.
No, I get it, because I've suffered from depression. I've had what you'd class as a nervous breakdown when I was younger. I was really quite ill, and so I certainly have had experiences of being at the bottom and stuck and in that dark hole and blah blah blah. So I never take for granted. And what's really interesting about lockdown is it has been a real ups and downs. And I've had to completely stop the way of working and change and all of that. But I have had ups and downs, but it's not, it's kind of, I do believe that my practices have kept me sane. And again, that it's that work in advance of difficulty. So, so you start to notice when things are getting a little bit more than just an off day and an off energy. That's fine. We all have it. And, as women, we have it through the month. Some days you just need to ride it and accept that, some days are more challenging. Men as well, but mostly, we have a different, obviously with the hormones and whatnot. So there's that, but also that we are all different. But some of the practice, maybe the coaching, the yoga, the meditation, if you do it when you're feeling good, if you set those healthy lifestyle, the way you eat, the way you exercise in place when you're feeling well, you're much more likely to be able to ride the storm when it comes. Because when the storm comes, that's when you go, I've got to do something about my well-being. Well, great, obviously, but it's a bit more tricky to get through that stage if you haven't got the tools in advance or you haven't sorted your boat out.
I quite often, people tend to come to coaching because there's something there present for them then. So once we've worked through that, what I will always try and do is think about, if it's relevant, obviously, because it's not always of everybody, but if they've come to me in a bit of turmoil or, with an issue that they've worked through, it's then understanding what they can do to be aware so it doesn't happen. Well, not so it doesn't happen again, but if it does, you're more aware more quickly.
Yes, exactly.
So it's that working on yourself and having that full awareness. And you talked about earlier, feeling it in your body, and when you sit with emotions or you meditate or you have that awareness through yoga. I often notice when I'm doing yoga how I'm feeling and how that changes as I'm doing as well. After even with poses that don't look difficult to do, my heart's thumping because it's really difficult just holding a pose. It's really being aware of that, and that's one of the things I do like about yoga. But it's the same in as I would talk to somebody that I'm coaching. When you feel this anxiety, where do you feel it? What do you sense in your body? Where in your body? How does it feel? Because you notice those physical changes and be aware that there is a physical reaction to some of these things as well. You can notice them at a later stage, and it's changing that feeling sometimes of not being in control of your reaction. And there's I think a lot of people think you get the stimulus, a situation that triggers something for you, and then you've got your response and that's it. Whereas actually there isn't. That you have the stimulus, you might have that initial reaction, so your threat response might come in, but it doesn't mean that's the end. So you've then got a choice of what you do with that afterwards and how you respond. So you might get that initial reaction, you've then got a choice, and then you choose how you want to respond. And it's helping people to work that through and notice those different stages. And some people are so stuck in that I just can't, and it's a massive realization for them when they work that through and realize that they do have a choice, and the empowerment that has for them is big.
And the body, you know, you said about the body and the physical poses and whatever, and just two things from what you said is, one, yes, it has a physical manifestation, you know, anxiety, fear, all of these things, that it has that initial, but then the body keeps score. You know, we say that sometimes the power of yoga, the physical practice of yoga, is actually releasing long held tension, and people cry. You know, I've been in classes where, you know, I thought I'd worked through everything, and then, you know, and then I'm just been like a blubbering wreck, kind of like, oh, you know, in a good way. It's like, no, it's good, something's still got to come. And, you know, the shoulders, the guts, you know, the back, the hips, all of this stuff, we work through the body, but sometimes it has a profound effect on that connection with that long held tension. And as you said, there's the body, but then the mind. So once that initial response has gone, it's held somewhere, maybe quite deep in the tissues, but the mind plays it over and over. So you don't just have that hardship or that hurt once, you have it hundreds of times until it starts to recede, and then it becomes an imprint of something to avoid. We call this dvesa in yoga. You know, we have this aversion to suffering, and that's also a problem, because the problem is it's created an imprint of what to avoid. I can't, I won't. Because of that remembrance of how it made you feel, you avoid it, and therefore you don't open yourself up to possibilities. So yeah, absolutely, if there's somewhere to start, certainly on the yoga start with the body. Easiest thing to work with. We know how to work with the body. Mind come along in its own time. You know, we can start examining. Some of the work takes a little bit of time, but talking, we're all used to this kind of like asking questions and solving problems, brilliant. But when it comes to that deeper stuff, sometimes it takes a little bit of time for that to catch up. But the body,
I always remember, because as a coach, I will go and be coached as well. It's good. I also engage in supervision because I'm part of the International Coaching Federation. I'm a member of the ICF. So part of our ethical framework is that we make sure we engage in regular supervision and CPD as well. So the supervision element would take anonymous kind of conversations of what might have played out in a coaching session. So there's almost a reflection there for me on my practice, and you know, it's just made me think of sitting in some of your yoga classes and seeing you do this really challenging pose. I'm going, I can't do that, and you always say you can do anything, believe that you can do it. You haven't tried it, and it almost brings me back to that's the kind of things I'd be challenging people on as well in coaching. And it does bring me back to a time in supervision where I've talked about I sometimes fall into rescuer, and the comment that came from the supervisor was, well, how long have you been a rescuer for? I imagine it's probably 40 plus years, because it's so ingrained in you. And I'm thinking, yeah, it really is. And so actually, you know, for me to work that through, I'm now aware that I sometimes fall into rescuer because I want to help people. But as a coach, the responsibility on change is on the clients.
You're trying to empower them to help themselves rather than do it.
And I truly believe that everybody can do that for themselves. They know the answers. They know what they can do. They know what they can achieve. And I'm going to support them with that. So, but if I know that these patterns are really ingrained, it's going to take a long time to unpick, and that's okay, because every little step towards, you know, towards where you want to get to and working really hard, the impact of coaching doesn't stop after a 90-minute session. It's something that works on, and most of the work's done outside, if I'm honest, outside the sessions, because it takes a lot to think about what you've learned and how you take that on. And you know, it's
absolutely
interesting.
It's fantastic. Wow, I think we could speak for another hour, I'm sure. I find it fascinating. It's kind of all of this sort of self-awareness work is so, I mean, it used to be, it kind of, I think most of us recognize how important it is. It's not navel gazing. It's not some kind of arty-farty, hippy-dippy sort of thing. It's actually just understanding self. And it's been the question from time immemorial. Who am I? And how do we unpick some of the less helpful habits? And if we just summarize it by, actually, we all want to live a joyful life, everyone. I think that's our ambition. So how can we do that? Because you have it, everybody has it within them. It's there. We just got to work it out and use these different techniques, whatever's right for you, to start to do so. So I'm going to say thank you very much, Jenny, unless there's anything else you want to say. And I will post your link below to the website. And are you on Facebook or Instagram?
Yes, I'm on
as well,
Facebook. Yeah, I've got a website, jennyrichardscoach.co.uk.
It's nice and easy to remember.
Yeah.
I will post the links, and I would definitely recommend Jenny as a wonderful person and a good friend too.
Thank you.
And I will see you on the mat virtually for now.
You shall.
Which has been a lifesaver. I have to say, the ability to, some of the positives from lockdown, this time last year, we never have thought we'd be able to do as much as we can virtually. So, there's been some good stuff that I think will endure, whether you like it or not, is a blessing to some. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend, Jenny. Namaste.
Thank you. And namaste too. And thank you ever so much.